One issue that always boggles my mind is that the idea that a gun is a defensive weapon. That is a myth. A gun is not a defensive weapon. A gun is an offensive weapon used to intimidate and used to show power. Police officers do not carry a gun as a defensive weapon to defend themselves or their other officers. They carry a gun to be able to do their job in a safe and effective manner and face any oppositions that we may come upon. If it was a defensive measure, why did we lose 55 officers nationwide last year to gun violence?
This is the most ridiculous, embarrassing, unprofessional, and deceptive thing I have ever heard from the mouth of a chief of police. This guy's nothing more than a progressive liberal dressed up in a cop's uniform, spouting the progressive mantra about guns. Prior to being in the ministry, I was in the field of Florida law enforcement for over 10 years. I worked as a deputy sheriff for 2 different Florida sheriff's offices, as well as the Florida Department of Corrections as an officer and as an assistant administrator of a bureau in the Central Office headquarters at the state's capital. Additionally, I served a couple of sessions as a firearms training instructor for the Florida Police Academy, the Madison, Florida division. I know police work. I know firearms. I know firearms as is involved in police work. This California chief of police is either a complete imbecile or was being purposely deceptive to promote a political agenda. I have a feeling after watching this clip that he probably is both. A firearm is a weapon, period. It is a defensive weapon, and it is first and foremost a defensive weapon for police officers. Officers are not trained to use their weapon as intimidation and show of power. It is unprofessional, unethical, and depending upon how an officer might use it as intimidation, it may be illegal for him to do so. Certainly a firearm can be an offensive weapon, but rarely does a police officer use his weapon strictly to go on the offensive. Most always, a police officer's firearm is drawn and used as a defensive weapon. Almost always. Much of the firearm instruction a police officer receives in police academies across our nation is in the defensive, tactical uses of firearms. Additionally, this police chief contradicts himself horribly. He says a gun is not a defensive weapon. He calls it a myth to believe that it is. Then he says police officers do not carry a gun as a defensive weapon to defend themselves or other officers. Then he says they carry a gun in order to do their job in a, quote, safe and effective manner, and to face any oppositions that we, quote, may come upon. In other words, a police officer carries his gun to defend himself and other innocents around him. If it was a defensive weapon, why did we lose 55 officers nationwide? That was his argument. Is he implying that simply having a gun on your side as a police officer will guarantee that you will never die because the presence of the gun is your 100% defensive guarantee? Additionally, did you hear this guy admit that in his department anyway, the philosophy is that they carry a gun to intimidate people and to show them their power? This guy is unbelievable. If ever a community needed to use its recall powers, it's with this so-called police chief.